Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third panel of Flagship 2025. I'm Annie McDowell, a Director of Product here at Harness, and in this session, we'll explore how feature management combined with built-in release monitoring and feature experimentation can equip you with data-driven insights that help you move faster and smarter. Joining me today are Nathan, Keely, and Ralph, product managers from TV New Zealand, Pods, and Cars.com. As we dive into some interesting data points and trends that we've uncovered, they'll be sharing insights and real world examples of how these concepts have played out at their organizations. Now, I'll let the panelists share a bit more about themselves and their roles. Nathan, can you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Annie. So I'm Nathan. I'm based in the corner of the world in New Zealand, and I work at Television New Zealand, who are the public broadcaster here. So myself and my teams, we work on our streaming platform. We've got a bunch of news content, entertainment, and sport that we make freely available to the New Zealand public to stream through the platform. And experimentation's been a big part of our journey. So really happy to be here and share some of the things that we've learned over the years.
Great. Next, let's go to Keely.
Hi, I'm Keely. I'm a technical product manager at Pods Moving and Storage. For those of you who don't know, Pods pioneered portable moving and storage about 25 years ago. We're an industry leader in the space, and our coast to coast service network covers about 85% of the US population. So we've done 6 million moves. Pretty big footprint. And as product manager at Pods, my specific area of ownership is the online booking flow. So excited to share how we've been using experimentation to improve the customer experience at Pods.
Great, thanks. And over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, Annie. I'm Ralph. I'm based out of Salt Lake. I work for Cars.com, member of the Cars Commerce family. We are all about simplifying the car selling and purchasing flow. The marketplace is kind of the heart of the operation. There are almost 1 million unique users on that platform every day, so we are really at scale for experimentation, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. Let's dive in with our first topic. So, in today's fast paced environment, teams face the challenge of increasing efficiency while maintaining innovation. And many teams have really doubled down on experimentation as a tool for rapid iteration and learning, but other teams have started to view experimentation as maybe an obstacle to that. How have your teams navigated this pressure, and what role, if any, has experimentation played in accelerating your development cycles? Ralph, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, Cars has several years of experimentation experience across different processes, across different organizational structures, and also different tools being deployed. Cars Commerce has grown through acquisitions quite a bit in recent years, and so we had a multitude of different approaches. A little bit back, we just started to rethink how can we, in a remote work environment, since we're a distributed company, how can we enable more people to do experimentation more confidence and at scale and faster. And that's how we ended up evaluating different kind of tools and platforms, and we ended up with Split about 15 months ago now. And what Split has allowed us to do is really put the experimentation platform dials into the hands of the product managers who drive the growth, who drive the shopper experience, who drive the dealer experience, and then work with their engineering and design teams to come up with worthwhile features and worthwhile capabilities. And it has been an educational journey, but we are moving along nicely on the maturity curve, I would say.
Great. Yeah, that's great to hear. Keely, in our conversations, you've shared that experimentation for you all was maybe more top down. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I know you said that teams are struggling between this kind of trade off between moving quickly and experimentation. And I would say at our org, experimentation was not a choice, it was an expectation. So we're expected to both rapidly iterate and test. But it honestly, after running the first tests, it was not hard to convince the entire org that testing was essential to feel confident that the changes we are making were actually driving positive business outcomes. And I actually think that when you're able to prove the business value, it can help relieve that pressure of rapid change. Oftentimes, in my experience, when companies are really pushing you to get a lot out the door, it's kind of this, you're buying a lot of lottery tickets because you don't know exactly which ones are going to hit, and so it's like, oh well, let's just try to get as much out, and see what works. And instead, when you can take a measured approach and you can do an experiment, it can actually help you understand, hey, I'm hitting my business targets, so we don't have to buy as many lottery tickets. We can kind of slow down. We know that we're on track. Um, and I actually think that rather than being an obstacle, experimentation can help speed things up at a higher level, because getting political buy-in from leadership can be easier when something's framed as a test. It's not a binary like, should we do this or should we not? Let's run this test. Let's see what actually is best for our customers. Um, the only way in which I think it might be an obstacle is it does force you to slow down, because you have to kind of step back and really check that your mental models are correct. The whole framework of designing the experiment helps ensure that you're making good product decisions rather than just rushing to get things out the door. So I actually think that even the obstacle of having to slow down is really a benefit. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like introducing that concept of also like moving in the right direction, not just how fast
Yep.
you're moving in any direction. Absolutely.
It's
And
really
Nathan,
more
how
about
is
the
your
outcomes
okay,
over
sorry.
output.
Yeah, absolutely. Nathan, how has your experience been at TV New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to echo what Keely's saying, like I think yeah, that outcome over output has been one of the things that we've seen, and I think um, once we started doing more experimentation and having those conversations with stakeholders around the value that's being captured, I think it has helped build a lot of trust with the team, and that we're doing the right things. And that can really help in terms of taking some of that pressure off, right? Because I think everyone knows ultimately the most important thing is the value that you're getting out the door, more than lines of code or number of releases. Um, so yeah, I think that's been really helpful. I think another side of it is the teams and motivating the teams. I think everyone wants to work on things that has value, and experimentations let us really quantify and capture that value. So it's a great way that we're constantly communicating back, whether it's a revenue result or whether it's just that we've increased how much people are engaging with this feature. It allows us to constantly reiterate for the teams, the value of the work that they're doing. I think that really helps keep people focused and keep people motivated, and keep people from leaving. So it's really helped get the teams humming, um, shall we say? And another side of it as well, I think, is we tend to think about experimentation as there's this new feature, this new capability we want to roll out. So let's go and experiment with it. But it's also a really great tool to take things out of the platform. Um, so, when I started, I think that we had what I would describe as a lot of feature bloat in certain areas, and trying to suggest to get things removed from the platform was quite difficult because it was a very opinion-based conversation, and everyone could always find a reason why there could be this impact or there could be that impact. But once we got into the swing of things with experimentation, it was much easier to say, well, let's just take this out. Here's the hypothesis. We can go test it. We can use the data to make sure we haven't inadvertently impacted something. And it became much easier to then start taking things out in areas where we thought that would be helpful. And as a result, I think we've really debloated a lot of things, and that's helped the teams move a lot faster because there's just less things to test, less things to code around, less things to potentially break. And you can focus on having the things in your platform, the things that are driving the most value.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I love that. Go ahead,
actually, if
Keely.
I could add on to what Nathan was saying and echo what he was mentioning about the motivational aspect, especially for developers, I've found, as a product manager, I'm always wondering, how can I keep my developers engaged? How can I make sure that they're satisfied with their work? And they have not felt as inspired by those top line business metrics like, hey, we're driving this many orders, we're driving this much revenue, but they're always interested in the results of an experiment that we launched. They always want to be able to connect that day-to-day work they're doing with like what we're seeing in customer behavior, and so I found that experimentation is a really great motivator for our developers as well.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely there's a lot of commonality here. And it sounds like for all of you, it's not just about moving faster, right? It's also about moving smarter and maybe, as you all have mentioned, moving together in the same direction, and really focusing on maximizing that value that you're trying to bring to your customers, but also to your teams, your organizations. But we're also hearing that many organizations are still struggling with how to incorporate experimentation or even more robust monitoring into their release cycles. And one of the findings that we had from our analysis was that less than 20% of production flags are actually used for experimentation. Around 40% are still just on off toggles, turning something from 100% off to 100% on, and the rest are employing a variety of targeting and release approaches. And again, this echoes the sentiment that we're hearing from development teams that they're really grappling with when to run an experiment, when to just turn something on, when to do something in between. Keely, does this data resonate with you? How do you all strike this balance at Pods?
Yeah, I have to say that at Pods, the breakdown is much more heavily skewed towards experimentation, and that's a trend that's just continuing to grow in our org. Nearly everything is worth running an experiment on, with the caveat that you do have to gut check the magnitude of the impact you expect. So there are, of course, times where there's some change that's so minuscule you won't see a difference in the data. Um, and we use 3% about as a benchmark for when to test something, as in we think about the change that we're wanting to make and we say, well, will that introduce a 3% difference in customer behavior between the control and the test group for the given metric we care about? And of course, the more you run experiments, the better your gut instinct will be for what changes will move the needle to what degree. So I know that that 3% benchmark is a little tough, but again, as you do more experiments, that'll become more instinctive. But as I mentioned before, yeah, we're actually moving more towards experimentation rather than feature toggles, and we're aiming to expand our usage of Split to not just customer facing features, but the rollout of technical infrastructure changes as well. So while in the past we would just release some technical change, now when feasible, we want to slowly roll out our purely technical changes to smaller groups of users so that we can monitor the side effects and then we understand the impact on things like performance metrics. So again, even for the non-customer facing things, the things that are purely technical, there's not like a light switch approach. We're moving towards wanting to slowly roll that out, test it against the control of the old technology and the new when we can. Of course, it's not always possible, to make sure that those changes are positive.
Got it. Yeah, I love that concept of using kind of experimentation techniques for more of that technical monitoring use case. That's really cool. Nathan, how does this look with your team?
Yeah, so I mean, we're probably similar in that we do have quite a strong bias for experimentation. It's very situational, obviously. When you want to experiment or not. But I think generally, if we expect a change to push a key metric, then we'll try to run that as an experiment. And there are also plenty of situations where we kind of just experiment just to double check, everything worked well and there weren't unexpected um, negative impacts from things. Um, Situations where we might not experiment, it's more where it's more of a back end change or more of a bug fixing release or more of a technical change than introducing a new feature or tweaking a feature. Again, we might run an experiment just to safeguard, but I think what Kelly mentioned before around sort of developing intuition is actually really true. It's like the more experimentation you do, the better you kind of get a gauge, and you always want to play it on the safe side, but you can also develop a confidence to say, you know what, this is probably fine given all the factors. We'll just roll this out. Um, so yeah, so I think it's just something you do tend to learn over time where you need it and where you don't. But yeah, we have that very strong bias towards experimentation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Ralph, I know you mentioned at cars.com you all are ramping up and scaling with experimentation. So how do you navigate decision making with the cars.com team?
Yeah, no, actually two things that Keely and Nathan mentioned really resonated with me. The first one being the feature bloat that Nathan mentioned. Uh, the company is 25 years old, so you can imagine a lot of knowledge, institutional knowledge, a lot of instinct, but also a lot of great features that have survived many, many years, have all come and lived together on the marketplace. And so the challenge is, how do you stay innovative? How do you respect what has been has been proving itself over the years while staying innovative? And so being able to come up with a data-driven approach and a data-driven justification of saying, maybe we just remove this feature and see what it does. And maybe we do something almost like zero account budgeting, saying we start from a clean slate and then we add a few things. And if, like, for example, the conversion rate is still the same, then the question becomes, well, what do we do with the other 10 features that didn't make it onto the new version of this page? And so we can go back into discovery mode and reimagine it in a new fashion, unconstrained by the legacy, which is really, really helpful. As to experimenting everything that Keely mentioned, I think we are working towards that. We're not quite there yet, and a big portion of that is the know-how about experimentation, because experimentation methodology has evolved a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, right? When like 10 to 20 years, barely any e-commerce companies did any experimentation. Now everybody does experimentation, but the methodologies have evolved, right? Sequential testing that we love and do is really beneficial, but it also has features that make it harder to explain. And so I would say the communication piece is really important for us. The concept of stat sig, right, this buzzword that flies around all the time, it can be as much an inhibitor as it can be an enabler. And so I would say we're at that point where we are close to the top, and once we get a little further, then it will be like downhill and we will really like be on a gliding path, and I'm really looking forward and getting excited for that. But there is definitely a self-education and a communication piece that's really important to keep us moving on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really exciting. Because yeah, well, it's definitely a journey to find the right balance. And it sounds like you all are either skewing or really pushing towards that more experimentation balance. It definitely may change and evolve over time. And there's obviously a lot of components to that cultural evolution as well. Another part of the journey is not only knowing when to measure or experiment, but also what you should be measuring. And that was another aspect of the analysis that we covered as well. Ralph, you kind of mentioned traditional experimentation, and another part of traditional experimentation, right, is really hyper focusing on that maybe single success metric that you're trying to improve. But we've really seen that this concept of impact is continuing to evolve and expand. And we've seen that organizations want to ensure that experiments, yes, they want to improve something, but you also don't want them to have unintended negative consequences. And so the concept of protecting what's important is also becoming more varied. And we're seeing more performance metrics, actually, like web vitals, being monitored as experiment guardrails. Although we're still seeing that business metrics continue to outweigh performance metrics 3 to 1 in terms of experimentation measurement. So, Ralph, how does your organization decide what gets monitored to ensure that you have a holistic understanding of what impact a feature rollout or an experiment is having?
Yeah, so we've been using Split now for a little over a year, and definitely the first year was all about user level business metrics. But in the last 6 months, we've also brought on a lot of new talent in the product engineering space who have experiment experience in other large organizations in the e-commerce space and beyond, and they're bringing a lot of new ideas to the table. And when you think about the marketplace model of cars.com, you don't only have cars that you can buy and sell, you also have a large media business, an advertising component to it. It's definitely very important to contemplate the impact of any features, any changes that we make across different devices and platforms, right? When somebody's on an Android versus an iOS versus a web experience, we need to consider what does that mean for latency, given their network bandwidth and all that kind of stuff. And so we are just coming out of a 2025 experimentation roadmap meeting actually last week where we discussed these topics. So how do we bring in Google Analytics information into the experimentation platform? How do we bring in core web vitals? How do we bring in ad attribution, media clicks, that kind of whole segment of the business, which is very important and growing a lot for us, into the experimentation platform. And we're currently exploring the API that is being provided and seeing how can we take all that good data that we have in our data warehouse and feed it into the engine to more contextualize the whole picture and the whole experience and therefore make better decisions.
Yeah, great. That makes a lot of sense. Nathan, how did the data resonate with you?
Yeah, so we're similar in that, yeah, it's very business focused metrics. We tend to have um, sort of key performance metrics that are used across all experiments, and those are things that sort of ladder up to key business metrics. So it's mostly stuff around engagement, time viewing, number of ads seen, and so we've got those, and then we'll normally pair those with something that's more localized to a particular experiment. So you might be updating some component on your homepage, and then we'll have some metrics around, well, how many people are engaging with that component or clicking with it or taking some action with that component. And for us, generally, those metrics will pick up um, issues in other areas. So for example, we've often had well, not often, I would say often, but we've had situations where we'll see an unexpectedly bad experiment result, and we'll roll back the change, and then we'll go dig in, and actually it had nothing to do with the feature itself or the hypothesis. It was because somebody forgot to track analytics on one of the apps, or there was some bug that was preventing this thing loading. So um, in a way, like those sort of top line metrics still help us find those issues in other areas. Having said that, I do think the more you can get into the platform, the better. And I think over time we would definitely like to be piping in some of those different data sources in as well, so we can get to the problems or where the areas of issues are faster and know sooner. Um, but yeah, that's our setup at the moment.
Got it. Yeah, so it sounds like it resonates pretty well with you then. Keely, what about you and the pods team?
Yeah, I would say we're in the similar boat to Ralph and Nathan, and I especially liked your story, Nathan, about it was not a problem with the hypothesis, but it was actually some other performance issue that was going on that caused an experiment to have an unexpectedly negative outcome. Because we've run into that before, and I would say at Pods as well, our metrics are still more business focused, particularly around the data we're able to easily capture on the web. And of course, as I'm concerned with the booking flow, we're mainly looking at orders, how order conversion is affected. But we're moving to expand to operational metrics that occur offline as well. So things like cancellations. Customers currently have to call and do a cancellation on the phone, and so we're actually in the immediate term actually going to hook things up so we can see when phone cancellations occur that actually goes into our test, so we can make sure, hey, this test doesn't just drive orders, but like it actually also drives up cancellations, so maybe it's not as good of a performer as we thought it was. And we're also building in web performance guardrail metrics on data points from Google Analytics or our monitoring tool Datadog, things like latency, error rates, bounce rates. So definitely still more business focused, but especially according to split best practices and your guys' guidance on our guardrail metrics really should be more comprehensive and outside of just the pure business metrics. We're trying to achieve that.
Got it. Well, yeah, it definitely sounds like we've got three votes for still business focused, but rising interest in performance. And I think that makes sense, right? Because earlier in our discussion, you all have talked about shifting that conversation from like speed towards value. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of businesses value is spoken still in those business metrics and KPIs. So I think that completely makes sense. Um, but that being said, understanding what to measure really is crucial, because that is what ultimately enables release monitoring and experimentation to shed light on the impact and the unexpected outcomes. And Nathan, you mentioned this earlier, where you all have had examples where experimentation flagged some of these unexpected results for various reasons. Can you share more about a specific instance where you uncovered some surprising results that maybe led you to reconsider your initial plan or expectations?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so quite a recent example would be some relatively, what we thought was some relatively straightforward changes around naming some of our landing pages in the main navigation. And we were really confident that they were relatively simple changes, and we thought there's no issues here. But we were particularly confident because we had done a bunch of research, and that research had sort of confirmed that people thought there were better names that we could be using in our navigation. And so, as usual, we're confident in this, but we will run it as an experiment. And we actually saw some big drops in people visiting those pages, but it also translated to some smaller but still significant drops in those sort of top line engagement metrics. So that was a really surprising one, just based on having that evidence that we thought we had through the research. Um, Another example would be around a personalization engine, where we there will be updates to the core engine, new models available that in a lab give you much better results, and so we would feel really confident about those things. But when we actually brought in the new models and tested them out, we actually saw they weren't performing as well as the old ones. So um, that's really helped us in the past in terms of sticking with things that are finely tuned and work best for our setup over necessarily just chasing the latest and greatest stuff that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. And so important as you think about kind of the rise of AI and everyone rushing to incorporate that into their applications. But unfortunately, it can be such a black box. So I think there's a lot of parallelisms there in terms of how experimentation can maybe help shed some light. Keely, how about you at Pods?
Yes. So one that comes to mind is we were experimenting with a shorter, more direct booking flow versus a longer conversational one. And this experiment mainly targeted our local moving customers. We didn't expect a big impact on our long distance moving customers, since at a certain point in the flow, we still ask them to, hey, call to get pricing and place your order on the phone. Um, and we naturally thought that the shorter flow would perform better. Typical e-commerce, make it efficient and you'll get more people to check out. But surprisingly, what we found was actually the longer conversational flow resulted in more long distance orders, despite these customers having to call in and get price. And so this led us to believe that customers who are doing a long distance move actually prefer a more hand holding experience. They want more explanation. And, when you step back and think about it, it almost seems obvious. It's like, oh, you're moving across the country. Like, maybe you don't want to just go really fast through a flow. You kind of want to take a time and understand what you're getting into. But it was interesting because this really shifted our strategy away from how we build our online booking flow. And instead of going to something that's, more efficient, where can we cut? It's more, where does it make sense to actually ask more questions and make the flow longer, so that we can increase customer trust and increase that customer education at the same time, because we found that that's actually what our customers want in order to feel confident in a booking.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very interesting. Ralph, how about you? I'm sure you have a similar experience at cars.com.
Yeah, we do, but I just want to say I totally empathize with what you found, Keely. I moved from Chicago to Salt Lake. It's a long, long drive, so I would definitely want to think about things first. Yeah, I think of Split actually as a mirror of sorts for that we hold in front of ourselves. Sometimes we see what we want to see, and sometimes we don't really look that great. It's more like a bad morning today, and so that's what brings us to reflect more deeply about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the one experiment that's kind of the marquee experiment that I think of is the the shopping experience for somebody who either needs to decide, do I want to inquire about a vehicle that I really like, or do I first want to figure out whether I can get the financing and how much I would have to pay down, right? Both are important pieces. I just went to a dealer last weekend actually, and it definitely resonated with me that it would be a hard choice. Like, what do I do first? I really like the car, or do I first think about the financing? I still haven't made a decision. So we are still figuring out now the funnel of what's the right flow. And so we've taken a step back and we're back in discovery mode of maybe we should reimagine this. Maybe it's not one funnel. Maybe it's actually more of a hand-holding experience, right, across several iterations. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. We have a lot of ideas, but it forced us to think more deeply about what is the shopping experience really like for the person in front of this computer or on their phone, because on a phone it's also very different than when you sit in front of a desktop at home. When you are with your phone in a dealer lot and you decide, what do I do now? I inquire about this car or I check about financing. It's very different than when you sit in the comfort of your home. So I think of experimentation as a mirror. It shows us the ugly and the pretty and everything in between.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love all these examples because I think you all just really emphasized not just the kind of data aspect of experimentation, but really all the learning that goes into it, right? And all of the kind of contextual things that you can uncover just from getting that initial um, data result. So I really love that thread in all of the stories that you shared. Well, we are right at time here. So thank you so much to Keely, Ralph, Nathan for being here today and sharing all of your insights and experiences around how monitoring and experimentation really contribute to safer, smarter, more impactful product releases. And thank you for everyone else who's joining us today for this conversation. Next up is our closing panel around unleashing the power of feature management and experimentation at scale. So we hope to see you all there.